Good morning, everybody. I am Nupur. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Nature at the Very Core of Science. Today is the first day of 2025, a new year, a new dawn. I wish a very happy new year to you all. Let there be happiness, joy, and peace everywhere in the world. Today, we will listen to the story of Aung San Suu Kyi. You know, when I utter this name, the first image that reflects before my eye is of a caged bird flapping its wings desperately. But then my mind becomes very confused and disturbed. A bunch of other pictures also rush there, some of them shining like a bright summer sun, others shrouded in haze like the eclipsed moon. There was a time when Suu Kyi's name stood for freedom and democracy in the world, the last source of hope for Burma's oppressed population, a living embodiment of peace and reconciliation. But later, that same person became a weak character compromised with lies. How does it all get mixed up? It is hard to accept that tragic reason for this change. Suu Kyi has now reached 79 years. Her voice has not been heard for a long, long time. To understand Suu Kyi deeply, it is necessary to touch on the history of her legacy. I'm sure you also want to know what was Suu Kyi's childhood like. When and how did Suu Kyi enter politics? Let's begin. Burma or Brahmadesh is a country in Southeast Asia, popularly known as the Republic of Myanmar since 2011. Aung San Suu Kyi was born on June 19, 1945 in a small village called Saung outside Rangoon, which is now named as Yangon, in British Burma. Suu Kyi's father, General Bogyoke Aung San, was a Burmese politician, independence activist, and staunch anti-imperialist revolutionary. He played an important role in the struggle to free Myanmar from British rule. Suu Kyi's mother, Da Khin Kyi, is the eighth of 10 siblings. Khin Kyi grew up in the Irrawaddy Delta town of Myang Mai. She attended the American Baptist mission-run Kemendine Girls' School in Rangoon and completed her education at the Teachers Training College in Molmain. Khin Kyi then became a teacher at the National School in her hometown. While her two older sisters were training for nursing, following in their footsteps, Khin Kyi decided to join the nursing profession against her mother's wishes and became a nurse. Da Khin Kyi then moved to Rangoon and joined the Rangoon General Hospital as a nursing probationer. You might be wondering why I am writing so detailedly about Suu Kyi's parents. Yes, there is a purpose behind that. Da Khin Kyi's first meeting with Aung San in 1942 is as startling as a movie fiction. The scene was Rangoon General Hospital, where Aung San, who had been wounded in the Burma campaign, was recovering from his wounds under the care of doctors. And Khin Kyi? She was then working there as a senior nurse. The 27-year-old leader Aung San fell in love with Khin Kyi, who was 2 years older than himself at first sight. And just a few months after this first meeting, on September 7th of the same year, this wonderful couple decided to get married and start their life together. Aung San and Khin Kyi had 4 children, 2 sons, Aung San Woo and Aung San Lin, who drowned at age 8, and 2 daughters, Aung San Suu Kyi and Aung San Chet. The last daughter also died 5 days after giving birth. Suu Kyi, the youngest child in the family, was growing up in Burma. But just 6 months before independence, on July 19, 1947, Aung San was assassinated. Aung San is still considered as the father of Myanmar's independence. As I told, Suu Kyi was only 2 years old when she lost her father. The newly widowed Khin Chi took all the burden of the family on her head. Khin Chi was a worthy consort of husband Aung San. She served as a member of parliament in the country's first post-independence government from 1947 to 1948, representing Rangoon's Lanmadao township, a seat won by her husband. In 1953, she was appointed as Burma's first Minister of Social Welfare. In 1960, Dakhin was appointed Myanmar's ambassador to Delhi, the country's first woman elected to serve as head of a diplomatic mission. Suu Kyi moved to India with her mother. The then Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, arranged for the mother and daughter to live in a colonial-era house at 24 Akbar Road, New Delhi. Sir Edwin Lutyens built this house, which is an excellent example of British colonial architecture. Built between 1911 and 1925, the house is considered one of the masterpieces of early modernism. Nehru named the house Burma House in recognition of Dakhin's special status. Starting from 1961, this house became the address of 15-year-old Suu Kyi for the next 2 years. After finishing high school in New Delhi, Suu Kyi attended Lady Shri Ram College and later earned a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy, Politics and Economics from St. Hugh's College, Oxford. Suu Kyi's British guardians at Oxford were former British ambassador to Burma, Sir Paul Gore Booth, and his wife Patricia. Suu Kyi lived in their home and met Michael Aries, a student of Tibetan literature, through mutual university friends Paul and Patricia's son Christopher. This man, Michael, was not an ordinary person either. From 1967 to 73, Michael was a private tutor to the royal family of Bhutan. But then, Bhutan was a forbidden state. Michael began researching Bhutanese history and eventually became head of the Bhutanese government's translation department. Being so far away from London, but Michael's friendship with Suu Kyi never wavered. And after a long courtship, Suu Kyi and Michael were married in a simple Buddhist ceremony at the Gore Booth family home in London on New Year's Day 1972. Suu Kyi's new life began, a British housewife in Oxford's elite society. Michael then began his PhD in Tibetan literature at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and for most of the next decade, the couple and their 2 young sons, Alexander Aries and Daniel Kim Arundel Aries, split their time traveling and living in remote Himalayan regions, including Bhutan, Nepal, Ladakh, and Arunachal Pradesh. Michael created quite a star in the learned community by writing a series of important articles and books, including Bhutan, the early history of a Himalayan kingdom, Scenes in Medieval Bhutan, the diary and drawings of Samuel Davies, and sources of Bhutanese history. During 85-87, Dr. Aries was elected a fellow of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. Suu Kyi was also not sitting idle all this time. Along with bringing up the children, she was vigorously continuing her writing and studies. It was during this time that she published her father's biography under the title Aung San and various other travel books. Time doesn't stand still. 1988, March 31st. Suddenly, the telephone comes to Suu Kyi. Dakhin has a serious stroke. Extremely worried, Suu Kyi left for the country by boarding a flight to Rangoon the next day. Soon, Dakhin was discharged from hospital Suu Kyi took her mom straight to the family house number 54 on the shores of Lake Inaya. From here, the story took an unexpected turn. Let's talk about Burma's then political atmosphere. After independence from the British government, there was a democratic government in power in Burma. But in 1962, through a coup d'etat, the military under General Nevin took control of the country. But on July 23, 1988, the ruling military dictator General Nevin resigned. Burma's political arena became tumultuous. On August 8, there was a mass uprising across the country. Myanmar's junta has killed thousands of civilians as the military has used violent repression to quell the protests. The following month, on August 15, Suu Kyi took her first political step, sending an open letter to the Myanmar government calling for the formation of an independent advisory committee to prepare for multi-party elections. Soon after, on August 26, 1988, Suu Kyi gave her first public address to hundreds of thousands of people outside the Shwedagon Pagoda, calling for a democratic government. In a speech in Yangon, Suu Kyi said, "As my father's daughter, I could not remain indifferent to what was going on around me." Michael and her two sons were far away then in England. On 24th September, the National League for Democracy, NLD, was founded and Suu Kyi was elected Secretary General. Influenced by US civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. and India's Mahatma Gandhi, Suu Kyi chose non-violence and civil non-cooperation as a strategy of protest against the junta government rather than forceful resistance. Suu Kyi's demand towards the junta was to hand over power to the people to pave the way for a developed, balanced and democratic society. The military, in response, established the State Law and Order Restoration Council and banned political gatherings of more than 4 people. Arrests and sentences without trial were introduced. Suu Kyi defied the law, toured the country, speaking to large audiences and continuing her anti-establishment stance. On April 5, 1989, during one such visit to the Irrawaddy Delta, Suu Kyi was confronted by armed Tatmadaw. The soldiers' rifles were aimed at her, yet the undaunted Suu Kyi walked silently towards the army on firm feet. Although Suu Kyi lost her father when she was only 2 years old, she showed the same resistance to oppression as her father. The heart of the assembled people swelled with pride after seeing the bravery of the beloved leader that day. On July 20, 1989, Suu Kyi was placed under house arrest without trial or charge. It is not difficult to understand that Suu Kyi's huge public support led the military government to panic and arrest her. That was the first imprisonment of Suu Kyi. Alas, who knew later how many days, months, years of her life she will spend as a prisoner? During her service, she was under house arrest for 6 years this time, and most of the time she had to spend in mandatory solitary confinement. Although the wings of her activities were thus clipped, Suu Kyi continued to try to bring about the change in Myanmar. Despite Suu Kyi's detention on May 27, 1990, the NLD won a landslide victory in the general election, winning 82% of the parliamentary seats. The SLORC refused to recognize the results of the vote. In addition to refusing to release Suu Kyi, the junta arrested other prominent members of the NLD also. In the meantime, Michael conveyed the news of Suu Kyi's condition to the whole world. Let me remind you something at this point. The contribution of Michael behind Suu Kyi's recognition is immense. No matter how much is said, it will still be too little. Suu Kyi is such a blessed woman to have such a husband like Michael. The people came forward to honor Suu Kyi's fight for democracy. In 1990, Suu Kyi was awarded the Rafto Human Rights Award. Then in 1991 came the Nobel Peace Prize. As Suu Kyi was still under house arrest, her eldest son, Alexander Aris, accepted the award in her place, and as usual, Michael was on the podium along with the kids. Although released from prison in 1995, Suu Kyi's movements were closely monitored. Her New York Times bestseller, Freedom from Fear, in which she spoke about the value of democracy and peaceful resistance, was also published the same year. On March 27, 1999, Suu Kyi's knight in shining armor, Dr. Michael Aris, on his 53rd birthday, died of prostate cancer in London. He has not seen Suu Kyi since her Christmas visit in 1995. He therefore made many requests to the Burmese authorities to see his wife for the last time, but all of those were cruelly rejected. You know, like you, my heart skips a few beats at this juncture of the story. My mind is filled with a great pain. My eyes become watery with an intense sadness. It is not hard to understand how much Suu Kyi sacrificed for democracy. She just lost her earnest lover, her fairy tale husband, her greatest cheerleader. You might be thinking, well, Michael Aris could not come to Rangoon. Suu Kyi could go to London by herself to sit at the bedside of her husband. Would not the junta government allow it? No. Why would that be? The government had been urging her to join her family abroad, but Suu Kyi feared that once she set foot outside Burma, she would not be allowed to return and would be exiled forever by the government. For a democratic Burma free from tyranny, therefore, she accepted this separation from her family, dearer than her life. With a stone in her chest, she passed her days. Not only Suu Kyi, Michael and the boys all gave up their normal lives together for Burma's freedom. In fact, from 1989 to 2010, after her return to Burma from England, nearly 15 of those 21 years Suu Kyi had to live under house arrest in that lakeside villa in Yangon, with minimal contact with family and close relatives. What impossibly great self-sacrifice. This story is not complete here. I will finish it in my next sitting. I have collected all the photos shown in the video from different online public domain resources like Wikipedia, Times of India, Reuters, and etc. I am very much indebted to those sources. Thank you all for giving your time. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.